Everything's ready. This will blow that motherfucker up. 3, 2, 1. Oh, fuck. Season 4 of Breaking Bad, bitch. That is television. Holy shit, this video could be 2 hours long. I could talk about this season so much. So many things to talk about. So let's get to it. Anyway, catching you up along with these Breaking Bad reviews. I planned on doing these every single day this week. Unfortunately, YouTube decided to be a bitch and not upload my season 3 review hardly at all. Spent like 14 hours uploading, which is absolutely ridiculous, and retrying it didn't do anything, so I don't know what the deal was. But anyway, you guys have seen the season 3 review. This one is going to be dropping, and then later on today, season 5 will also be dropping, and I will be reviewing El Camino tomorrow. So really just kind of put my plans off maybe by about 10 hours or so. But anyway, season 4 of Breaking Bad might be my favorite season of television in history. Like, it's serious competition with season 5. I go back and forth on which one that I love more. I'm probably going to do a season ranking, so I guess I'll have to decide that by the end of this week. But season 4 of Breaking Bad really just is an explosive, tension-filled, riveting season about Walt and Gus facing off from start to finish. So leaving off where we left in season 3, where Gus planned to have Walt killed. Jesse was in hiding. Walt got one step ahead and sent Jesse to go and kill Gale Boetticher, leaving only Walt and Jesse for Gus to have as meth cooks, basically forcing him to keep them alive, at least for the time being. This season starts off immediately where season 3 left off, with the gunshot heard around the world, and the first episode of this season, Box Cutter, easily top 5 Breaking Bad episodes. I mean, it's just, that is an episode that is so self-contained but is so tension-filled that it's impossible to look away for even a second. I mean, you get everything caught up after that huge cliffhanger. If you were watching live with me where you had like a year plus to wait, it was even worse. But even if you're watching on Netflix, you're like, holy shit, what happens after that? You get started with Box Cutter, a little bit of a backstory showing Gale setting up this lab and, you know, alluding to this box cutter. But this entire episode is Walt and Jesse, along with Mike and Victor, fucking Victor dickhead, waiting for Gus. And you as an audience member waiting for Gus, waiting for his reaction, waiting for what is going to happen. There's a lot of other things going on, but that's the main focus of this episode, is them in the lab. Walt still confident and cocky as hell. Jesse absolutely like quietly broken from having to murder this innocent guy, well, mostly innocent guy, Gale. And Victor basically saying, look, you're not shit because I've been watching you and I can cook this meth by myself. So he starts going along. And when Gus shows up, that's when this episode and this season really kicks off. Just a mind-blowing sequence with how much is said with nothing being said by Gus. And this is the point when you really realize how scary and terrifying Gus can be as an antagonist. Walks into the lab, looks at him with that look like, you motherfuckers. Goes down, quietly and cleanly changes his clothes, folds everything up nice, puts on this little lab suit, walks through the lab. All the while, Walt's talking shit and kind of devolving his conversation from being very overly arrogant about the situation all the way down to basically subtly begging for their lives and trying to get him to see reason, like, you can't kill us now, so please don't. And Gus doesn't say a word. Gus doesn't react to anything. Gus doesn't even really emote facially. And when he stands next to Victor after kind of walking around Walt and Jesse, and you do not know what's going to happen, and then he just slices Victor's neck open. holy shit. You want to talk about like your heart skipping a beat. All the way down to the way that they end it really cool with them having to put Victor's body in acid, and Mike's just like, I don't know, never use this shit. Does this actually work? And Jesse's just like, trust us. So, great episode. I'll probably get more into it if I do a top 10 Breaking Bad episode, because that will definitely be on that list. But for an opening to a season where they suddenly know what Gus is willing to do, even just completely cut the throat of his own man and just stare at them the whole time and let him bleed out like, you did this and I'm coming for you next. And oh my God, I can just talk each individual episode if I really wanted to for this season. But overall, let's get into characters throughout this entire season. Starting with that box cutter episode, obviously kicking things off. Walt is in a place where he feels like he's gained time, but it's all borrowed time. It's to the point where he knows that Gus is going to try something again. And even though he has secured the safety of him and his family and Jesse, it doesn't feel like it's permanent at all. Not for an audience member and not for Walt. And this entire season is him trying to get a leg up on Gus, and Gus having 10 legs up on him over and over and over again, basically all the way up until the last 20 minutes of the season, to the point where every single thing that Walt tries, every trick that he pulls, every little manipulation that he tries to pull on Jesse or anybody else, or even Mike at one point trying to convince him to let Walt and Gus be in a room alone so he could fucking shoot him with that little .38 snub. So many times that our protagonist, who has always found a solution out of these crazy ass situations, who has always had either a scientific or a historic or just some kind of a scheme to get out of whatever the hell is in front of him, and just none of it works the entire season.
You clearly don't know who you're talking to, so let me clue you in. I am not in danger, Skyler. I am the danger. A guy opens his door and gets shot and you think that of me? No. I am the one who knocks.
And even away from all of the Gus drama, just all the stuff going on in his household. Like Skyler and him are still kind of separated, but they're on better terms. They're buying this car wash as their front and as their money laundering business. You have this whole thing going on with Hank, to where Hank is in healing and he's kind of, you know, he's buying minerals and he doesn't really have a whole lot of interest in doing any police work as he's healing from the gunshots of 1 minute from last season. And you have one of the biggest moments of ego from Walt, and really the point where he screws himself. And it doesn't really come into play until a season and a half later, where they're at the dinner table. You know, they went over to Hank and Marie's house. Hank has been given a few things by the DEA and the FBI to kind of check out. I believe it was the FBI, but things about Gail's murder to check out in connection with blue meth. Walt looks over it, covers his tracks, everything's cool. And they get drunk at one point later on in the season, where Hank has pretty much washed his hands of the blue meth thing. He's like, look, it was a dead end. It almost got me killed. It's whatever. This guy Gale was probably this genius. And that fucking ego from Walt, hearing somebody else get the credit for his empire and his product, pushes him over the edge. And he can't let it lie. He can't look at it as a positive of, I got away with it for now, or I got away with it forever and always, but in order to get away with it, I have to let that guy take the credit, and he can't do it. And even though he's drinking, I don't even think the wine was to blame for him basically giving Hank that extra little bit of motivation, saying, yeah, I don't know, I checked out those notebooks and it really seemed like a student. I think your mastermind might still be out there, Hank.
Not to tell you your business, but I'm not sure I agree.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you showed me that notebook, and from what I saw, and this is just my humble opinion, from what I saw on those papers, genius? Not so much.
And that is the scene, just the look in Hank's face, that is the scene that plays out slowly throughout the rest of this series to come to Walt and ultimately Hank's downfall. And that is just, for a character's ego to be continuously his downfall, like Walter White is the epitome of that. And they explore it even more, and they give you reasons why, and especially in season 5, they start to explore much more of that kind of brewing regret about the gray matter issue. But there's all these things that just slowly pick at this guy's ego, that he has such a sensitivity to not getting enough credit or to not being hailed as this mastermind that he is, that it will set him off in an instant. We'll get more into it in season 5, but this was the big moment of Walt's downfall in season 4, even aside from all of the crazy shit going on with Gus whenever he just let Hank know that your Heisenberg is still out there. Jesse, he honestly probably gets the most to do and the most time to shine in season 4 that he has yet in this series. Even though he's a huge piece of it, you really see a huge arc with his character in season 4, where he starts off, he's very broken, he's the one that Gus wanted killed and he wanted out of the situation, and kind of inadvertently caused this rift between Walt and Gus, but doesn't really see it that way necessarily. But you start off the season, he's so emotionally fucked up from having to kill Gale that he kind of devolves into mania for a while, where he's letting his people just come into his house and party all day long. He can't stand silence. He can't stand being alone. There's graffiti on his walls. There's just insanity in his life to a degree where it almost makes it another threat altogether for Gus and for Mike. And speaking of Mike, it's that budding relationship that Jesse and Mike have over season 4 that is probably one of my favorite elements of this season, because Mike could not stand him. Mike was honestly the one trying to find him and kill him in season 3. But Gus, being the mastermind that he is, puts these two together without any explanation for Mike whatsoever, and they kind of gain this respect and this friendship and this partnership, and inadvertently, Jesse ends up becoming kind of like the new henchman for Gus, while Walt is just trying to figure out what the hell is going on and feels like everything's a scheme, which it kind of is, and feels like Jesse's being torn apart from him, which he kind of is. And all the while, the one that Gus wanted gone the entire time is the one that he's pulling in closer and showing what true loyalty actually is. And even though he is manipulating him to a certain degree to get Walt where he needs him, you do get the sense that Gus respects Jesse as a partner or henchman or employee, whatever you want to call it, more than Walt ever did. Walt has that love for him, but he's always manipulated him and used him and moved him around like a pawn. Where there's a section of this season where you really feel like if Walt was removed from the picture, that Gus and Jesse would have had this great friendship, work relationship for years to come. And I love the fact that this season just totally turns that expectation and gives you character relationships and gives you elements of Jesse kind of embracing this business that you did not expect to see. You almost expect when the season starts for Gus and Mike to try to get at Jesse at any way that they can, and Walt having to come up with all these schemes to keep him safe, when they kind of take the other route and just, all right, we're going to pull Jesse in. He's going to be our friend now, and he's going to hate you for it. And when Walt and Jesse come to that explosive fight, when Jesse is full on in Gus's employment and underneath Gus's wing, and Walt can't stand it to the point where he lets it cause this rift between the two, it's the worst that you've ever seen the relationship between these two characters, to the point where Jesse basically tells him, get the fuck out, never come back. And even the first 1 or 2 times that he tries to come back, Jesse won't have anything to do with it. Leading all the way up to the penultimate episode whenever Jesse comes to Walt's house to murder him. Because you get this whole subplot where this little boy, Andrea's son, Brock, ends up getting poisoned, and you have this ricin cigarette that Walt has been trying to get Jesse to give to Gus the entire season, and Jesse is putting the pieces together and assumes that Walt has given the ricin to Brock as some kind of like a revenge, and Walt uses that to say no, it was Gus, and just this whole like mix of storylines kind of coming together, and this whole like mix of plots and double crosses and triple crosses all come together in this episode, and you don't really know what to believe. You're on Walt's side because he's your protagonist, and you're on Jesse's side, and when Walt convinces him with his performance by Bryan Cranston, where he's kind of laughing and, you know, pulls the gun to his head, he's like, if you think I could poison the kid, just put a bullet in my head. You actually believe Walt that Gus did do this. Like, Gus has gotten that desperate that he would poison a child to fully get Jesse under his wing so that he would finally sign off on killing Walt, and he even takes it a step further and becomes the hitman himself. Just, God, all the way that from the beginning of this season all the way through to the last couple episodes, how everything comes together is just brilliant writing, brilliant storytelling. So this whole season with Jesse, his relationships, the way that they flip everything on its head, like that's one of the highest praise that I can give to season 4, is just how brilliant that side of the storytelling was.
If you think that I am capable of doing this, then go ahead. Put a bullet in my head and kill me right now.
I'll do it.
Do it! Do it!
I'll do it.
Do it. Do it.
Now focusing on Hank a bit, because he's definitely, once again, he gets a little bit closer and a little bit closer, just like these little incremental improvements at getting a little bit more sly to what is going on, and gets this close to Walt, and Walt slips away just by a nose once again. I've heard some people say that, this is the point where it starts to become a little bit unbelievable that Hank has not kind of wised up that Heisenberg is Walt, or not wised up that Walt is a part of this somehow. And you know what, the reason that I don't see that as an issue at all, just to kind of address that, because it's not a negative for me whatsoever, is that if you look at the relationship between Walt and Hank, it's subtly done, but these guys are very close. Like, they're basically like brothers, not brother-in-law. And they've been together so long, and they have such this long history of this relationship that we don't even know about, because we only know about the last year or so, as far as the storyline of Breaking Bad's beginning, that there's those blinders on. And you could see that Hank has those blinders on, because he's not even looking at Walt. Like, even when they have the whole storyline that Skyler gives about the gambling and how all this money came about, at the same time there's this meth kingpin out there, and Walt's a chemist. Like, all these things that when it comes down to it in season 5 and he figures it out, it all comes together and makes perfect sense. But at the same time, it makes no sense, because this is Walt. Like, this is the guy that I know and love. He would never do any of that. So that emotional block that Hank has always made sense to me. But nonetheless, Hank's storyline this season really is about coming back full force into the DEA. He's been injured, he's been healing, he's basically shut off completely from Marie. She goes back into kleptomania for a little while there, probably the most that she's been given on the show, to be honest. And she's very good as well. But you get Hank, and by kind of getting involved with the Gale murder and being that subtle nudge that, not so subtle nudge that Walt gives him in that one episode, telling him that the Kingpin is still out there, gets back into this, slowly puts the pieces together that Los Pollos Hermanos is involved, slowly puts the pieces together that Gus is the most likely person to be in charge or to be tied with this blue meth empire, and might be Heisenberg himself, and just puts all these things together and just lays it out for the DEA.
I mean, what do we know about Gustavo Fring, huh? This whole friend of law enforcement thing? Could be a case of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. I mean, he's got the money to finance this operation. Maybe he's got the connections too. Maybe, just maybe, he's our guy.
And there's a great scene whenever he comes in with all of his findings, and he comes up with all these things, all these little weird questions that he's been putting together in his head, all these weird little connections. And even though everybody that's at the table is kind of like, I mean, yeah, that's a little weird, but this is Gustavo Fring. Like, you don't have anything more than that. And he's like, you know what? You're right. It was just all conjecture. But why is his fingerprints at Gail Bedeker's apartment? And everybody's like, holy fuck. The audience and the characters in the room. And just the fact that Hank keeps getting so close, finds out where the laundromat is. Walt has to crash into a car to keep him away from it. And I also love that dynamic that they had through this season, where Walt kind of becomes his chauffeur, his Lyft driver, if you will, while he's out trying to discover all these things and trying to investigate these things and stake out, because he can't drive. And so Walt has to help him, while at the same time, without drawing kind of suspicion or drawing Hank's anger, keep him away from everything that he's discovering, because everything that he's pointing out is fucking right. And it just makes Hank such a badass this season. Hank, you're awesome. Fucking Dean Norris, you are awesome too. But the whole arc about him just keep getting closer and closer and closer just makes him feel like his intellect is on a level with Walt, just in a completely different way. He's smart science-wise and with evil schemes, and Hank is smart at just putting pieces together and being that relentless hunter. And just, again, this whole season, aside from everything going on with Gus, you see that confrontation coming and that revelation coming from Hank figuring out that Walt is Heisenberg, and it just, again, just slowly building that story for that final season. Perfection. And of course, with season 4 especially, we have to talk about Gus. Holy shit, this guy took so much of a focus in season 4 and grew into such a fascinating character that he's one of the greatest antagonists that have ever been put on television, and even rivals some in movies. Like, you look at this guy, and they could have just kept it simple. Just a businessman who's been getting away with it for decades, and Walt is this thorn in his side, and he has to use his intellect to get ahead of him. But when they start giving you pieces of his backstory with the 1-2 punch of Hermanos and Salud, whenever you show, like, whenever he first gets into this meth business and he tries to pitch it along with his business partner, and his business partner gets his head blown off, and that whole brilliant scene, the fact that you get Stephen Bauer in here, some Scarface alumni as Don Eladio, and then when they follow it up with Salud, which is just one of, I don't even know how you could say, like, one of the greatest episodes of season 4, because it feels like the entire fucking season is that, like, great episode after great episode after great episode. But that whole back half of this season is like incredible episode followed up by incredible episode, to the point where you're like, this just keeps getting better. I don't know how it keeps topping itself. And Salute is one of those episodes where Jesse and Mike and Gus have to go to Don Eladio's territory, and basically Jesse has to teach his crew how to cook blue meth. And you get this awesome scene, getting away from Gus for just a second, where Jesse comes in and he's totally scared to death that he's gonna fuck things up, because he really only knows how to do it Walt's way, and with Walt's equipment, and with Gus's, lab equipment, and the barrels have to be a certain way. And he goes here, and actual chemists know him to be a fraud. But Jesse's attitude and Aaron Paul's delivery whenever he comes in and he just starts talking shit to this Harvard grad chemist about how you're gonna do it my way, bitch. It's a fucking awesome scene. But getting back to Gus, I told you I could talk about this season for hours. Whenever you have this whole revenge ploy all come to its head in Salute, it almost makes you want Gus to stick around, as much as you know that he's not. And as much as you know that eventually Walt or Jesse or somebody's gonna get the better of him by the end of this season, you almost want him to live, because he's such an awesome character. And he's just so fascinating with the backstory that you know, and so much of the backstory that they don't even give you, they just hint at. Like whenever Don Eladio looks at him and he's like, you're not in Chile anymore, they never tell you why. I mean, Breaking Bad might elaborate on it, or Better Call Saul might elaborate on it, but they never tell you why they know who this guy is and why there's some kind of a history there that they can't fuck with him to a certain extent. But when you get to Salud and you have these 3 characters go off to Mexico and they have to cook meth, and Jesse brews it at like 96, 98% or something like that. I think it was 96. And it's like off the charts good, and it almost makes you believe that Jesse has to stay behind. And then Mike gives him that line, he's like, kid, I promise you, either we're all leaving together or none of us are. And you're like, what the fuck are they planning? And there's this poison in this tequila, I believe it was tequila, and they're all drinking it, and Gus takes a sip of it to sell it, goes, throws up, comes back, and as they're all starting to drop, and as Stephen Bauer and Don Eladio realizes what's going on, and Gus just kind of looks at him that Gus way, like, yeah, you fuck with me, motherfucker, this is what you get. And Mike slaying dudes in the background and like choking them with this wire, and Jesse has to pick up a gun, and then they get shot, and Jesse has to get them to the hospital. Just so many things that were just so great about that episode, and everything kind of coming to its head with Gus's backstory and his start with the cartel, to the point where Jesse is now like the badass of this crew and has full on earned his place alongside Gus. And one of the more brilliant and unexpected pieces of this story too is his history with Hector Salamanca, you know, the guy with the bell. Bing, 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 bing. Whenever he comes back into the fold and you realize there's this long gestating hatred and rivalry between these two, to the point where Gus keeps going back to him and basically taunting him and mentally torturing this guy about how many people he's killing and how much he's getting back at all of them for what they did in Hermanos. And just how that is like this unexpected piece of the story and how it adds to the history of Gus as well as the history of Hector Salamanca, but also how that kind of plays into ultimately Gus's demise. It was just, again, brilliant writing. This season is like one of the most incredibly written seasons that I've ever seen, just with the way that everything just kind of comes back to itself and ties back in itself and sets up things subtly and pays them off huge. That is one of the best things. And in Gus, his storyline, how it all wraps up, is one of the biggest signs of that.
Hey! Get out!
Now moving into more of the family, you have Skyler, and again, this season, she's not nearly as frustrating as she was in season 3. She's a little bit annoying with like the script part where she wants to script out the evening and gives Walt lines to say, and she's so like anally meticulous about every little tiny detail about their story. For understandable reasons to a degree, but also it's annoying, and you see the annoyance on Walt's face the whole time. He's like, okay, I cry, what, 1 tear, 2 tears? And like when he buys Walt Jr. a car and he makes him send it back and he just gets pissed off and does donuts and blows the thing up, like one of those ultimate moments of like husband like rebel. You're like, no, can't fire me, I quit. It's a great dynamic that they have in season 4 that makes her a more enjoyable piece to this little empire that Walt is building, even to the point where she starts to get in on it herself, which I actually really enjoy. You get Bill Burr in this, which, God, I love Bill Burr. And I believe LeVar Burton is the other guy who is like another stand-up comic who's another one of like Saul's henchmen, if you will. But she has a scene where she has to get Bill Burr to kind of swindle Bogdan into giving up this car wash. And just the way that she has that kind of sly, not so much evil, but that kind of vindictive mentality and that little bit of sly scheming ability as well, where she definitely has some of those elements that she hates about Walt, but it's okay when she does them. Total wife thing to do. But I enjoy the fact that she kind of gets in on the business a little bit more, and she kind of has a little bit more fun with it, especially whenever she gets to the point where she has to really get involved with the Beneke issue, where she has Ted Beneke, her old boss, the guy that she was fucking in season 3 and then basically walked away from with no explanation. Season 4, all of the IRS issues come right back into the fold at the worst possible time for the White household, and she has to go full on into this situation to try to resolve it, to keep the IRS away from her so that they don't find out where all this gambling money came from. And that also just raises the stakes. There's so many stakes and so many subplots that just really boil up the tension in Walter White's life in this season to the point where it's just like, dude, I can't even stand anymore. Like, you add one more thing, it's just gonna explode. And the way that all culminates with her getting Bill Burr and LeVar Burton to go to Ted Beneke's house, and then that dumb motherfucker trying to run out and basically breaking his own neck. That shit was... Those are the dark comedic elements of this show that never quite leave, but they come in at the most surprising times, because this show gets so dark and gritty and tense that whenever you get little moments of comedy like that, it's like, oh my God, thank you.
Are you telling me you make $7,125,000 a year?
7.5 even, before expenses.
But I can't. This is too much.
So it's more than you thought, and this is somehow bad news.
And even Walt Jr., again, not like a huge piece of the show, but probably my favorite scene that this kid is ever in which is mostly because of Bryan Cranston and the way that he delivers it, so it's not full on his credit going to him, it's the both of them. But the scene after the big Walt and Jesse fight, where Walt is basically not answering his phone and he's sleeping and he's been drinking, and his son goes over there to check on him, and he just breaks down about like apologizing and kind of apologizing for the last year. And you really get to see a lot of emotion in Walter Jr.'s face in this scene, and how he's kind of like, he kind of subtly confronts his dad. Like, look, last night whenever I was taking care of you, yeah, it was rough, but it's better than how you've been for the past year. I'll take that guy. And it's really devastating to hear, because you don't really get to hear this kid's input very much. And it's probably really devastating for Walt to hear, because it's like, oh my God, I'm doing all this stuff and I'm totally losing my family, which is what I was supposed to be protecting this entire time. And even to the point where it's a little bit bittersweet and sad whenever he puts him to bed, and he's like, how was your birthday? And, oh, it was good. Oh, that's good, Jesse. And it shows you the disconnect that Walt is starting to have with his own family, and also just how much he truly does love Jesse despite how shitty he treats him. And so, again, like, not completely Walter Jr., just that whole scene that Walter Jr. really kind of sets up between him and Walt, and the dialogue between them and the performances of the two actors, Bryan Cranston and R.J. Mitty, is one of the best parts of the entire series as far as Walter Jr. stuff goes, because the rest of it's mostly him eating breakfast. Now, I said I'd be talking about my favorite episodes of each season, and I've done so far in the first 3 seasons that I've talked about. And my favorite episode in season 4, even though it is so hard to pick one because there's so many great ones, I'm going to give the focus, as of right now, to Crawl Space, because this is the episode where everything really starts to come to a very ugly head. You have Jesse and Walt are completely done with each other. Jesse is full on rejecting Walt. I believe it's the same episode that he has to crash Hank to keep him away from the laundromat, which is a great scene.
Walt, what are you doing? You just missed it.
Sorry, it looked like a dirt road. I thought you meant further up.
Just bang at you over here.
You have the whole thing where he, whenever he goes to approach Jesse, he gets tasered, brought out into the desert, and this is where Gus basically lets him know that this is done, and he gives this chilling like speech basically, or this threat to Walt, saying like, if you keep fucking with me, I'm gonna kill your entire family, and I'm not going to stop whether Jesse signs off at it or not. And even if you don't fuck with me anymore, Hank's gotta go. And just that, the whole way, this realization that Walt has, and again, just phenomenal acting by Bryan Cranston, where he's cocky and he's like, oh yeah, you're gonna, or else what? Even though he's down on the ground, has a gun to his head, or else what? And the ball's on him, you're like, oh, fuck yeah, Walt, we'll see how you get out of this one. But the way his face changes whenever Gus delivers that threat, and he kind of like, this paralyzing fear that he knows his family is about to is about to be done for because of all of his choices, and he rushes to Saul's and gets the number for what will eventually be Robert Forster, and the guy that can basically make you disappear, and goes to his house to get all the money, only to find out that Skyler has given it all to Beneke to try to get rid of this IRS situation, not realizing that death is looming over their house. And that whole scene in the crawl space is one of my favorite scenes of this entire series, and probably the best scene regarding Bryan Cranston's acting, or at least, God, there's so many of them. It's hard to say which one's the best, but it's definitely up there.
Where is the money?
I gave it to Ted.
What? You did what?
Walt, I had to. For us, for the family. Walt, please, just hear me out, please.
Where he's down in the crawl space and he's yelling at her, where's the money? And he just gets louder, where's the money? And whenever she tells him, and he breaks down, and it seems like he's crying, and maybe he even is for a moment, and then it just devolves into this like maniacal laughter that's almost terrifying. Jesse just realized, like, he's like, I'm fucked, and he just laughs about the whole thing. The music going on in this scene, the way that they shoot it, the way that Skyler's reaction plays out, all the while there's this, phone call that Saul put through, an anonymous phone call to Hank, letting him know that the cartel's coming for him to try to get him in hiding. All of that kind of coming together at the same time, and then the way that they close off the episode with that shot of Walt inside the crawl space laughing, and they slowly just zoom out and go all the way up as high as they can, and it kind of frames Walt almost like in a grave. And the cinematography in that scene, which again is something that I probably haven't talked about enough, is the technical aspects in this show, which are just top notch, the camera shots and the things that they're able to do. That whole way that they frame him in the grave, again, just brilliant foreshadowing, which is something that this show has done in spades. And it's an image that gets called back to at the very last scene of the entire series, the same exact stance that Walt is in, only where it's fear and it's mania. In this scene, it eventually goes to a relieving smile. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that in season 5. But Crawl Space is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite episodes this season, even though there's so many to talk about. Box Cutter, Salute, Hermanos, Crawl Space, Face Off. Oh, Face Off! We gotta talk about Face Off. Everything coming to a head. Walt now having Jesse back on his team. They've built a bomb. They're trying to scheme to get Gus to this bomb. He puts it in his car, in the hospital. Jesse draws him to the hospital at the end of the last episode. And Gus, being that sly motherfucker that he is, knows something's up. Walks almost all the way to his car, looks around, looks out, looking at all of these empty rooftops, and just knows that Walt is out there somewhere and leaves. And then you start Face Off, and this is an entire episode of just insanity trying to get to Gus, to the point where they have so many attempts and so many plots to try to get to him that fall through, just like this entire season where you're like, it's hopeless, this fucking guy is untouchable. And then Jesse lets out that little detail about Hector Salamanca and how it seems like there's some kind of a deep-seated issue there, and Walt clues in on it and knows how he's able to get Gus and convinces Hector to basically sacrifice himself, despite the fact that he hates Walt. He knows he hates Gus more. Sacrifice himself to end it all. And the way that it all plays out with that bomb and the wheelchair and that whole final scene with Gus coming through thinking that Hector Salamanca has ratted that whole little charade they put on for Hank, where he that little board where he has to ding and he's saying like fuck you and suck my dick and everything like that. That, again, dark comedy. The way that that whole scene plays out, where he's got that, the needle where he's going to put him down, last chance to look at me, Hector. And then Hector doesn't look at him, and he goes to grab him, and he kind of has this kind of sad look on his face, which that guy, I need to look up his name. What is his fucking name? Mark Margolis. Brilliant acting by him as well, especially in this scene. Able to convey so much with his face. This sad little face, and then it just evolves into bing, 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 bing. Gus realizes it like 1 second too late, and they even give you this little tease that maybe he lives, and he fixes his suit one last time, and then he's fucking Two-Face. Oh my god, it's so awesome. Like, such an awesome finale. One of the best season finales ever. I know I'm blowing the show left and right. I told you guys I was gonna do this. But Face Off, my god, what a closeout to the season. Just to find out at the last scene that motherfucker Walt was the one that poisoned Brock, and he used this plant, Lily of the Valley, and it just leaves you in this state where you were so happy, you were so relieved, even though Gus is awesome, you were so happy and relieved that they got rid of him, and that Walt and Jesse will prevail, and where things are going to go in the next season now that Gus is out of the way. Just to be left on that bittersweet note of, well, now how the fuck am I supposed to feel? Because now Walt has poisoned a child, could have killed him just to manipulate Jesse once more into getting his rival out of the way. And you're left in this spot where you're like, I don't know if I root for Walt anymore. And I don't know how to feel about that. And that theme totally gets played through in full force in season 5. All in all, guys, like I've said before, season 4 of Breaking Bad might be my favorite season of television ever. Like, it's in huge competition with season 5. That's how great this show is, that it actually has 2 seasons that could compete for that title. But season 4, I think, might be my favorite just because of how brilliantly this season is written, how everything comes to a head and is paid off regarding the rivalry and the back and forth mind game between Walt and Gus, the way that they flip Jesse's relationship on its head and use it against Walt, everything going on in the background with the family and Hank and Skyler. So many great episodes over and over and over again, like series best episodes, just in continuation for like 4 or 5 episodes in a row. This season is absolute perfection, brilliance at its finest. Season 4 of Breaking Bad, the shit. So if you want to witness what possibly might be the greatest season of television of all time, and possibly the greatest season of Breaking Bad in its entirety, check this thing out. Go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of season 4 of Breaking Bad? Are you as high on it as I am? Do you feel like this season slowed down a bit and didn't quite get into it so much? Are you in the camp that feels like the Hank not knowing aspect is getting a little bit stretched? Do you have any negatives whatsoever of season 4, or do you just blow this thing left and right like I do? Let me know down in the comment section below, and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. Be sure to check down the video description below for some social media links like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, my Teespring store just below that, which has all of my merchandise, all of my designs for purchase. I have like t-shirts, I have mugs, I have other kinds of bags down there. I've got 31 on 31 designs, which you can go ahead and represent this month. It's going to be dropping on Halloween. I've got the Off-Top Stream logo down there, which is beginning to be very popular. Check that out down below, guys, please. Also, my Patreon page, which is down in the video description below, is a great way to give back to this channel, help this channel grow, and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only if you decide to become a patron. So check all that out, guys. And if you want to check out some more of these videos, including all my past Breaking Bad reviews, you can check those out by clicking right over here.